1991, and 10 years ago, we're dealing with another hurricane bearing down on landfall. Many people remember back to 2005. We had Hurricane, of course, Katrina. We had Rita and Wilma, not to mention Dennis that year, but it's the year before that, 2004, which really devastated much of Florida. I want to bring in our hurricane specialist, Michael Lowry. And again, we're talking not as active nearly today than it was, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah, thankfully, Paul, but 2004 is a great example of where we had two named storms by the time we got to middle August, and then it just went gangbusters after that. So nothing like that today in the Atlantic. But let's start with what's happening right now, and then we're going to get to 2004 because some interesting parallels that you can draw between the two hurricane seasons, our season so far in 2004. Have a few clustering of storms in the eastern Atlantic, none of those really showing any promise for development because we have a lot of dry air. We talked about this last night, Paul, on a water vapor picture. You can see that dry air at the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. That all coming from Africa across the central Atlantic. It's really not that unusual this time of year to still see a lot of dry air out there in the central Atlantic. We start, though, at this time of year to see those big clustering of storms, those waves in the atmosphere, tropical waves, pushing from Africa. So once the atmosphere sort of moistens up here and the winds come down, wouldn't be surprised at all once we get to September especially that we start seeing more of these bigger hurricanes develop in the Atlantic. Also, you can look at the forecast here. That moisture is just going to stay there through the week. So any disturbance that rolls off of Africa, it's just going to get fed this sort of dry air from the northwest, and that'll prevent any significant organization. But you can still see bringing some rainfall maybe to the islands this weekend. Let's talk about the 2004 comparison. This is kind of interesting because 2004 was also a year in which we thought we were going to get an El Nino. There was a weak El Nino, and the forecaster for a weak El Nino this hurricane season. El Ninos generally weaken or lead to less storm activity in the Atlantic. But if you get a weak El Nino, you can still get activity. Take, for example, 2004, our first hurricane was Alex down here. Just off the Carolina coast, that grazed the coast of North Carolina in July and into August. Arthur was our first storm this year in July, and interestingly enough, that one made landfall up here along the Outer Banks of North Carolina. The second named storm in 2004, that was Bonnie. That one made landfall in northeast Florida. Our second named storm this hurricane season was Bertha. That one eventually became a hurricane but stayed out to sea. And for those of you living in Florida who could forget the third named storm there in 2004, that one was Hurricane Charley, as Paul was talking about just a few minutes ago. Take a look at this video from Mike Tice. This is 140-mile-per-hour winds here, Paul. I mean, this is a gas station. See the awning being ripped off.
And Charley, in relative to huge storms like, say, Wilma or even Katrina, Charley was a tiny little storm, but it was packing 150-mile-per-hour winds at one point.
Yeah, it was almost like a big tornado just ripping through southwest Florida. I remember going down there for some damage surveys after the storm, and it didn't resemble the sort of miles and miles and miles of devastation that you generally would see after a hurricane. But it was still a strong storm if you're in the path of it. It was really, really awful. And it brought 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts to Orlando after it made landfall there in Punta Gorda. So a really bad storm. And fortunately, like you said, nothing like that today in the tropics. But it just goes to show you, you can quickly get storms that spin up in the tropics. That's why we're always keeping our eye out, see if there's anything there. There's a few storms, or a few clustering of storms, rather, in the eastern Pacific. Still watching the remnants here of Tropical Storm Julio. There's a disturbance off the coast of southwestern Mexico. That one has a high chance of becoming our next named storm out there. That would be Katrina, is the next named storm on the list, but the arrow out here you can see pointing toward the west and out to sea. This is the visible satellite. Oh, let's take a look at our computer models. Taking it off toward the west, still ways away from Hawaii. Got a long journey ahead of it before any possible threat or impacts there. But I do want to talk about this sort of ribbon of storminess that extends about 1,000 miles or so to the southeast of Hawaii. You can see it right now on our satellite picture. This is part of something that we call the monsoon trough, and some of our computer models are trying to develop some area of spin right down here and develop it as it moves off toward the west-northwest or toward the northwest. Now, still a ways away from Hawaii, you can see Julio spinning out here. That one's moving out to sea. I want to show you one of our computer models. This is the GFS model. important to take this with a grain of salt because, well, this is just one model and there's a lot of disagreement among the models, but there is Julio right here. But look down here. This is the depiction of the winds. So the cooler colors, the purples and the blues, that is where the stronger winds are. And you can see as we get into this weekend, early next week, something trying to form down here, Paul, but plenty of time to watch this.
Yeah.